Thanks so much, everybody. So our presentation is on reproductive injustice and reproductive justice and the PALM scheme. So the topics, firstly, I'm just going to explain a little bit more about what reproductive justice is. We're working on the assumption that everybody knows what the PALM scheme is, so we're not going to explain that. Then I'll be talking about a research project that I've been working on, and then I'll hand over to my collaborator, Sarai, who's going to talk about the bilingual health education that True Relationships and Reproductive Health has been running. So reproductive justice, the primary principles are the right to not have a child, the right to have a child, and the right to parent in safe and healthy environments. So it's concerned with concepts such as pregnancy, terminations of pregnancy. I'll keep talking. Childbirth and parenting. And it's also based on the premise that all people require a safe and dignified context for fertility management, for childbirth, and for parenting. So this means things like high quality healthcare, a living wage, a healthy environment, and also a safety net when those resources fail or aren't available. So the aim of the research project has been to investigate the experiences of PALM scheme participants and also to some extent service providers and approved employers relating to reproductive justice. I've been working on this for approximately the past year. It's funded through the Pacific Research Program. It's been a qualitative study involving semi-structured interviews with 34 participants, including 11 PALM participants. That it has included some men as well as women who have been pregnant, women who have given birth in Australia, women who have gone home to give birth, and women who have terminated a pregnancy while they're in Australia. Spoken with 10 employer representatives and 13 stakeholders, also some group discussions and event observations. I'm based in Queensland on the Sunshine Coast, so my site visits have all been in Queensland, in Cairns, Mareeba, Bundaberg, Sunshine Coast, Caboolture, Gatton, and Brisbane. But the people that I've spoken to have also been based elsewhere, who I've interviewed through video calls in New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia, Fiji, and Vanuatu. In terms of the nationalities of the people, the research participants, I've spoken to people from 7 of the 10 PALM scheme countries, all of the major PALM industries. And for the stakeholders, that's included people in the health sector, hospitals, sexual assault services, health services, police, community organisations, and members of the diaspora. Just a thank you and shout out to all the advisors and collaborators who have supported this project. I won't go through them all, but it's involved things like reviewing interview questions for cultural acceptability and providing advice along the way. So I'm going to share with you some of the preliminary findings of this piece of research. I'm in the process of writing up a discussion paper, which will hopefully be published in the next couple of months. So this is sort of just the first taste of the issues that are coming through. So the 5 key themes are information and access, pregnancy, health insurance, having children, and sexual and gender-based violence. So on information and access, I found that PALM scheme participants face barriers in accessing sexual and reproductive health information and services, and that's for a number of reasons. And that inadequate information, as well as other very complex factors, are resulting in very challenging situations, including unplanned pregnancies, sexually transmitted infections. I found that pregnant women are being discriminated against in the context of the scheme. So there's pre-departure pregnancy testing. Women have to prove that they're not pregnant and able to take up an opportunity with the scheme. Women tend to be sent home if they're found that they are pregnant. From the employers I've spoken to, they found it's very difficult to manage. They often end up bearing the costs of pregnancy, particularly if the pregnancy takes place within the first 12 months, because the health insurance product doesn't The health insurance doesn't cover pregnancy if it's there's a 12-month waiting period. And employers are sort of a little bit frustrated that there's no procedure, there's no safety net when women do become pregnant. So they're kind of left to pick up, to step in. And because of this, employers can be quite reluctant to hire women because of this risk that they'll become pregnant. From the side of the PALM participants themselves, this really came through in the interviews that it's a time of really vulnerability. If somebody's pregnant, a lot of feelings of shame, fear, uncertainty about what's going to happen, how much is it going to cost, what's going to happen to me. It's quite common for women to hide the pregnancy from their employer for as long as possible, and not engage with any antenatal care at all. And I spoke to women who just found themselves in a really impossible situation where returning home was not culturally safe. Maybe the person who they're pregnant to is from another country, and it's just not an option for them to go home pregnant to somebody else. Terminating the pregnancy would be against their values, but they wanted to keep working and wanted to keep earning money, so it didn't feel like they could proceed with the pregnancy and do that. I came across women who had disengaged because of this, and then their situation was even more precarious. So their health insurance was cancelled, they don't have access to Medicare, and their visa status becomes irregular. In terms of terminating a pregnancy, the pathways to access this are quite unclear. The cost can be prohibitive. The stigma of terminating a pregnancy takes a huge emotional toll. I also have reports of home terminations or people trying to terminate the pregnancy themselves without any medical support. In terms of health insurance, as I mentioned, so the health insurance product is not meeting the sexual and reproductive health needs, particularly of women. There's a 12-month waiting period to access maternity services, and it's quite unclear which services are covered and which ones aren't. I spoke to nurses who told me that they wanted to help people to get a long-acting reversible contraception, such as an IUD, but that couldn't be covered by insurance. So they were, told people they'd have to pay hundreds of dollars for that. Also, in terms of STI testing and terminating a pregnancy, it's also unclear the pathways to access those and if they're covered by the insurance product. Sexual and gender-based violence also came through, and I found is also closely interrelated with unplanned pregnancies through the literature reviews that I did. Reproductive coercion is definitely taking place on an individual level. For example, women being forced to remove contraception by their partner. Structural reproductive coercion also, the fact that a woman might be forced to return home to give birth, or because of the visa insurance structures, she doesn't have the free decision-making around that. Workplace sexual harassment came through in the interviews, as well as sexual assault and coercion. Of all the places I went, PALM scheme participants were not accessing any mainstream support services if they were victims of sexual and gender-based violence. And from talking to employers, they really had a sense that they wanted more support around this, how to manage it when there is gender-based violence occurring within their work groups. And yeah, they wanted sort of procedures and referral pathways and better support around that. So that's the end of my part, where I've sort of talked about a lot of things that are happening in the scheme which would equate to reproductive injustice. But I'm going to hand over to Sarai, who has the good news story and is going to be talking about their amazing program, which contributes to reproductive justice.
All right, Salofa. So I'm just going to share a project that we're working at True Relationships and Reproductive Health. So we're a small organisation in Queensland. We have clinics, sexual assault services and education around Australia. So I shouldn't say small, right, if it's around Australia. So the this program started about a year ago. So the Palm Bilingual Sexual Health Education came out of a project called Health in My Language, and Health in My Language employed bilingual health educators to go out into community and deliver health education on numerous different topics, including navigating the health system, sexual health in language, because that was it is a huge barrier. So out of that program, we were requested by a number of approved employers to deliver sessions to their workers. So we then developed the Palm Bilingual Sexual Health Education. And I should mention as well that our funders or our partners in Victoria called the Multicultural Centre for Women's Health. So this wouldn't be possible without them. This is Tina and Levi. So we have 2 Pacific Island educators, and they've been running sessions for about a year now. They've delivered to over 2,000 workers to over 24 approved employers across Australia. So they speak in language. Tina speaks Samoan, and Levi speaks Solomon Islands Pidgin, Bislama, and a couple of other Pacific languages. So Tina has a nursing background. Levi has a clinical background. He was a doctor from the Solomon Islands. Okay, so sexual health in the Pacific, it does not really exist. So it's very taboo. It's a taboo topic. It's tapu, it's sacred in the way that it's framed by our religious beliefs as well as our cultural values. So you don't really talk about sex or say that word at all. So you can imagine seasonal workers coming over through the Palm scheme, being exposed to different things here in Australia. We deliver these sessions in language, but like I said, we don't have the capacity right now to meet the demand. Tina and Levi cover about 5 languages in the Pacific, but there's many more. So just gonna next this. The way that the sessions run, we have women's session and men's session, and this was in consultation with the workers themselves. They were more comfortable because it's women's business, men's business, and if there's anyone that falls in the queer community, LGBTQ, we also ensure that there's a session for them as well. So this is just a bit of data that we collected over this past year. So all Palm workers either agreed or strongly agreed. They learned something new from the session, and that really is important to us because the information that we're sharing could either save a life, and it increases confidence to reach out to service providers if they do need help. Almost all Palm workers either agreed or strongly agreed that they felt more confident about the health topics covered in the session. For a lot of them, it was the first time that they heard words like healthy relationship, contraception, sexual health, STIs, things like that. So it was really important that our bilingual health educators are trained to translate as well accurately. Almost all Palm workers either agreed or strongly agreed that overall they enjoyed the session. So you might think, oh, yeah, that's great, but what does that actually mean? But it means that they were engaged, they're there, they're listening, they're really taking this information in. So in terms of in-language sessions, 98.1% of Palm workers either agreed or strongly agreed they prefer learning in their own language. So there's a huge language barrier. And like I said, sometimes there's no words to interpret into Pacific Island languages because it doesn't really exist. So it's more the context and describing what certain things are in language. 98.5% of Palm workers said that they understood the information more when delivered in language. So I think Tina and Levi's jobs are really, really important. And like any other project, funding is always a challenge, instability of funding. So right now we'll fund it till June next year. However, there's a huge demand, which is why they travel interstate. And it's usually funded by NIB, the insurance company. And we work alongside local service providers, so local GPs, hospitals, sexual health clinics, just to ensure there's a referral pathway for farm workers. So these are just a few quotes. We get a lot of these feedback from farm workers after the session, and we allow about an hour, hour and a half after the session because Pacific people sometimes can be really shy and there's a burning question that they have, but they want to pull someone to the side. So we found that after the sessions, they have time to ask questions, and also for our bilingual health educators to support. So I think the quotes summarize the work in itself, and that this one here that says, most importantly, it gives me confidence to speak on my rights. So we cover things as well around what does the law say in Australia compared to what it says in the Pacific. And also it's your body, your choice. So recently there's a case study in Mariba. Yeah, Mariba, where there was increase in cases around sexual assaults. We worked together with the Tableland Sexual Assault Service and also NIB. It really is a collaborative effort. We bring in everyone just so we have like a holistic approach to this. So yes, more bilingual health educators, more funding. I don't know if there's anyone here that can support this, but yeah, that's what I'm here to advocate for.
Sorry. So Dr. Sarai is the coordinator of the Masters of International Development at Monash University and is a critical development student scholar who has undertaken primary field research, developing country context. She is an expert in the field of gender and development with a long-term interest in these issues in the post-conflict environment of Timor-Leste and is widely published in the field. Thank you very much. And please. Thank you.
Now, what shouldn't I touch? Yeah. And then just put it the other. Thank you. I'm different to most people presenting here in the fact that we've only just started this research. I don't have findings to share. And I'll show you who's in the team in a minute, but we really wanted to let everybody know who's been working in this field for a long time, that we're just starting this project. We've actually already done some interviews and things, which I'll talk about in a minute. But it'd be really great, whoever's done some research about accommodation for migrant workers, if they would share with us their findings. But I'll tell you exactly what we're doing. So we're looking at regional towns. Right. Okay. So there was already an acknowledgement of country this morning, but I've just got another one here because where I work in Melbourne at Monash University, we work on the lands of the Kulin Nation, and I just wanted to pay my respects to them. And I also just put my email in here, so if anybody does want to share any information with us, that's my email address. Otherwise, it's pretty easy to find me on that big Monash website. This one. Okay. Right. This side. Okay, so simply put, our research aims to analyse the barriers to safely accommodating seasonal workers. I mean, this is already an issue. I've spoken to a few people here this morning. It's a well-known issue for workers, migrant workers, that getting safe, comfortable accommodations difficult. But we're trying to generate a set of policy responses for use in regional locations. So we're looking at a bunch of regional locations in Australia across 3 states that address labour shortages and contributes to safe and secure working conditions for seasonal workers. We're funded by the Australian Housing and Urban Research Institute. So we're looking at it from a housing perspective as much as from a migrant worker perspective. So as I said, I'm just here to talk about our new research and seek your expertise about this topic. So this is just a few notes from our literature review. So as I said, people who have worked in this space for a long time already know that housing is a significant barrier for seasonal workers, internationally and here as well. And that seasonal workers, particularly in the agriculture and tourism sectors, compete for housing with long-term residents or tourists, or are reliant on their employers to provide the accommodation. That seems to be more the case than them seeking their own accommodation. But what this is doing is putting increased pressure on existing housing markets. I think people do describe we're in a housing crisis in Australia, rental crisis, which results in pressure on availability and affordability of housing, and particularly in tourist areas where our case studies are occurring. It means taking more rental accommodation out of those markets and then increasing rents, etc. So while the employers are required to provide the accommodation, all these sort of conditions mean that the affordability and quality of housing are not guaranteed, and that workers are experiencing high rents, substandard conditions, and overcrowding in the accommodation. So opportunities to shape how new housing is planned and delivered has to be addressed at local level. So we've been talking to local councils as well, to the planning officers in those local councils, also state governments. The opportunity to shape how new housing, both the literature and anecdotal discussions that we've already looked at indicate that seasonal workforce accommodation shortages prevent local businesses from operating at full capacity. And a key finding was that there wasn't many assessments looking at it from this perspective and of what the viable housing solutions might be. We've heard a lot of good ideas, but there hasn't been a comprehensive study on the housing kind of options and creating solutions to this. So, you know, the reason we got the funding is because they argued successfully that there was a need for comprehensive consideration of the barriers. So this picture is yours, I think, Lindy, but I just thought it showed the sort of accommodation that the not great accommodation that doesn't look that seasonal workers are living in. And it leads to unsafe experiences, and that this is a real theme in recent literature. Accommodation can restrict movement. People can't leave situations if they want to. There's not a lot of choice because people don't want to risk losing their jobs or their accommodation, and they're often a package together. Accommodation's not designed as spaces where workers are meant to gather, socialise, or otherwise live out a dignified life. Workers are subject to racial profiling through these processes of accommodation, housing, and segregation. Accommodation is also very gendered through the separation of male and female workers into living quarters, and hierarchies develop in these spaces. And as the last presenters said, it can lead to experiences of sexual harassment. So what we're trying to find is innovations and looking at solutions that have been put into place here and overseas. and opportunities for collaboration between local governments, as I just mentioned, local councils and the communities in those places. Labour hire firms and employers to provide safe and reliable accommodation to safeguard local businesses and seasonal workers. One of the case studies we've included is this, where this sign is here in this picture, in Coral Bay in Western Australia, where the provision of worker accommodation through an Indigenous land use agreement with the registered native title holders, a member of whom is on our research team, addresses both land availability and the sort of desires of the traditional owners for how the land is used. So the solutions need to be these collaborative solutions between public and private organisations. So our main research question is, how can seasonal workers in Australia be better accommodated to ensure a healthy, safe and productive workforce in regional areas? So there's some questions, and then these sort of generate down into the questions that we've been asking people in our interviews is, you can read them on the screen. What are the contemporary practices used to provide accommodation? What are the experiences of workers? And what we are finding is we're getting a whole lot of different perspectives from the different actors within these situations. What are the barriers to innovative solutions being provided? And what policy changes are needed to support these solutions? So these are our case studies across 3 states. So there's the 2 real touristy places in Western Australia, one up here in Coral Bay up the top, and one down the bottom in Margaret River. The New South Wales case studies are still being decided. And I'm doing the 2 in Victoria. So I'm doing them with the East Timorese community in Warrnambool, who are working at the big abattoir down there, and in Castlemaine, where I live, in just out of Melbourne, with the Solomon Islanders. And then we're deciding on the New South Wales. So we're sort of covering our bases with remote sites and large regional towns across the different sectors of employment, tourism, agriculture, and industrial settings, like the 2 kind of factories the guys I'm talking to are working in. I thought about it recently that we're not looking at the aged care sector, though, which seems to be where lots of women are working. And then we're covering all the different types of workers, the backpacker, the holiday workers, the seasonal workers, and the palms workers. So this is where we've got up to so far. The 2 Western Australian ones are much further ahead. It's much easier to speak to people in those places. People were more willing to talk. I've actually found it quite difficult to get employers to speak about accommodation options that they're offering. And there's a few people nodding who might know why that is, why employers wouldn't want to talk about this, because a lot of the accommodation is substandard and there's been problems with it. The Castlemaine case study is a bit more advanced than the Warrnambool one because the employer there won't speak to us, whereas the Castlemaine case study has been a bit more easy to progress. And we're talking also to community people. I've spoken to a housing advocate, I've spoken to the local council, a housing worker there, as well as the labour hire firm, although I think the person I spoke to got sacked straight after I talked to her, so I'm not sure what happened. Can't seem to find that out. Yeah, and then to sort of community organisations, to priests, particularly the East Timorese communities, who are all good Catholics, so that they get a lot of help from the church. So I've been talking to those, and they're great support, the church, often. Perhaps not in sexual and reproductive health so much, but in this more straightforward area. So what we found is that we found the case study approach really useful. So we're getting all these different perspectives and trying to find where the problems really lie, where the barriers are lying to find solutions. So talking to the workers, talking to advocates and community support, churches going here, to the employers when they will talk to us, to the brokers and labour agents as well. And then who are also reticent to talk about this. Local government and planning, we've spoken to them in local councils in the regional areas, and then we'll do this. Who I'm looking for here today are academics or experts in this area of accommodation. And that might be, and this is the team. So Todd Jones at Curtin is the team leader. And he's got another housing expert there with him at Curtin, and Michael also, who's an anthropologist. I'm an anthropologist. Joseph's a human geographer. So we don't have any economists on our team. All social scientists. So I think that's all I've got to say.
There is a housing crisis already in Australia, which means houses will, the long and short term will be competing with people on the market for these accommodation, especially which gets harder in regional Australia. And I mean, I know it's Q&A right now, and I have a question. Do you find that there is a difference in the accommodation standards between the long term and the short term? Are you looking at long and short term, or is it just the SWP cohorts? And then for Lindy and Sarai, do you find that if they knew that they could access these social reproductive health services prior to leaving their country, sending country, that this would improve their access when they get here? And then after my questions and their response, I'll open it up to the
I'm gonna go first. Well, I think that's why it's good to have all the different types of workers. So the holiday workers have a really different attitude to accommodation to the people that are going to be here, like the factory workers in Castlemaine and Warrnambool here for 4 or 5 years, sort of, semi-permanently. Whereas the holiday workers, it's just a short-term thing. And they sort of take the rough accommodation they get sometimes as part of this kind of adventure they're having, when they're younger. Whereas it's different for people who are going to be somewhere for 4 or 5 years. So there's a different level expected, I think. And then for the agricultural workers who are moving all the time from harvest to harvest and getting perhaps even worse accommodation, it's very different, which is why it's good to have all those different ones included. Did that answer your question?
just because I know a few employers who actually provide better accommodation for the
Yes.
workers than where I live now.
Yeah, and we're looking at those. We're looking for those good examples as well to promote as solutions. Yeah.
Yes, so in terms of pre-departure and what they cover there around sexual and reproductive health, we've been trying to find that information out. It is quite different in every Pacific nation. So we really want to ensure that when they first arrive here to Australia, we deliver these health education sessions. But what we're noticing is approved employers are reaching out to us down the track when they've been here for a year or so, or it really varies. But I guess to answer your question, yes, if they did have more knowledge around referral pathways, sexual and reproductive health services. But when you think about it, they're learning so much in such a short amount of time. It's like an overload of information. So when they do get here and it happens, our job, our bilingual health educators are there to say, this is where you can go. This is what you're dealing with. These symptoms mean you have an STI or you're pregnant. you'll be surprised at how many people after a session come and say, I have those symptoms. So now I need to see someone. What do I do next? So I guess we just meet them where they're at right now. Yeah.
And I'll just add that we've been doing a little bit of work with the International Planned Parenthood Federation, who has member associations in 8 of the 10 palm countries. In some of those countries, they are involved. I know the Fiji team does provide pre-departure briefings. Vanuatu is quite involved as well. But there's some that aren't involved that would like to be. There's a really good blog on the DevPel blog yesterday, which I've co-authored with people from TRU and IPPF and these member associations in Fiji and Vanuatu, talking about some of those solutions, which is, yes, let's have the conversation in country before they leave in their language. And so they also know where, when they come back home, this is where you go. And then it needs to sort of continue right the way through. So the Pacific member associations, they've been asking, well, can we get a list of all the services in Australia? And it's like, it's so complicated here. It's not just, but we're seeing these referral pathways as well, where sexual health services in Australia have, come to us and said, oh, do you know who in Vanuatu can take out an implant? So we'll refer them on. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, but yes, it's sort of just keeping that conversation going. But I think it's really important to start it in country, in language. So then they can, once they're in Australia, can sort of look out on, where is the sexual health service?
Yeah, that's one good. Just a bit of an update, I guess, from DFAT. Obviously, each government is responsible for the pre-departure briefing that is provided by that particular labour sending unit deploying workers. However, through the Pacific Labour Facility, we provide a lot of support to that process. And certainly sexual and reproductive health is a core part of the pre-departure briefing, as is issues of consent and gender-based violence. I would note, though, that we do put a lot of pressure on the poor pre-departure briefing. I think colleagues at PLF just did a survey of that, and across the Pacific, it's about 72 topics covered in pre-departure briefing. So our expectation that is going to sink into people's brains is pretty unrealistic. We are at the moment with the PLF undertaking a detailed design of a piece of work that's really going to strengthen our approach on sexual and reproductive health and gender-based violence, looking at issues of consent as well. And that's looking at a range of measures, including supporting learning outside of the pre-departure space, but before workers deploy, looking at a potential pilot, starting with one country, linking referral services in country to referral services in Australia so that people can access support from individuals in their language, noting that they are already pretty overwhelmed across the Pacific. So we'll start that with a pilot. Efforts around communications, and also working really closely with DUA to make sure that services remain available when workers are through their whole worker journey. We are about to launch in Tuvalu and Fiji a palm scheme learning platform, which basically takes a lot of those modules that are provided at the pre-departure stage, but beefs them out, makes them a bit more meaningful, provided in language and online. We're under no illusions that workers will access that every single worker will, just in their spare time do it. But what we will do is make that available to workers, but also employers and people who sit in the community of care around work, so that if an employer identifies that they have a particular issue, they can have their staff sit with their personnel, their workers, sit down and do that module of study that provides the information that they need. So I think we are looking at ways to improve knowledge and awareness, and also people's understanding of how they can access services. But it will be an ongoing process. And, we thank you for the work that you're doing with NIB. Just a couple of things to point out there. Yes, there are wait times, but pregnancy and abortion services are available through that NIB package. And I understand that long-acting reversible contraceptives are as well, as the advice I have from my colleagues at DUA. But again, workers don't have to take out that package. They can take out a different insurance package. So, health insurance is one of the modules that we cover, by the way, through that learning platform. So really welcome your research and analysis, and keen to keep working with all partners as to how we can improve what we can provide to workers to improve their experience in Australia.
Thank you, Kylie. That was a good update from you. I still John, you're next, right? And then Rochelle, and then Sara.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I do have a couple of thoughts to share with Dr. Nina about your upcoming research, which is great to see that it's coming out. I think one thing I really like about what you presented in terms of how you plan to do your research is that you are planning to interview both domestic and international seasonal workers, which is quite a broad base of all the workers out there. And if I may put forward a preemptive suggestion, is that I would love to see in your research this separate finding for those different group of workers, the domestic seasonal workers, and within the international seasonal workers, separate them out into student backpackers, which is one separate group, and those in the PARM scheme, which is quite different. The reason is their obligation and mobility are very different among those. I suppose, and this is my guess, the domestic and to a lesser extent, backpacker and international student have much more choices and freedom in who they work for, which employer they choose, where they want to stay, how they want to choose their accommodation. And employers have less obligation toward them, whereas those in the PARM scheme, both SWP and the short PARM and long PARMs have a very different arrangement. They are tied to their employers in their visa, so they don't have much choice in terms of where they want to live because they have to live close to the location of their employers, and their employers has obligation to provide certain levels of accommodation to certain standards governed by the government to them. So their choices are very different and their conditions are very different. So it would be great when the research come out to see the finding and their feedbacks separately for those groups. What I could share is based on the first wave of the Pacific Labour Mobility Survey that the World Bank and DEPPOL has been undertaken, we do have one finding related to accommodation where about 9 out of 10 PARM workers express that they are satisfied with the accommodation condition. And this is based on responses from more than 1,400 PARM workers, and with data collected during 2022 and early 2023. I'm happy to share the report, which has a little bit more detail if that helpful. So I'm just responding to your request for sharing that there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nui, everyone. Thank you so much for your presentations. I wasn't going to say too much to you, Sarah, because we spoke over lunch.
Yeah.
And thank you for citing me up there. Love you. But going back about the differences, so RSC workers have got different requirements than New Zealanders and backpackers. We each year require RSC workers to have more space than our other workers. So that is actually in that paper that you cited. So if you want to have a look at that, that's a difference. But I wasn't going to accommodation. I really wanted to talk to Sarai about sexual health. So with the RSC worker scheme, we were finding that our seasonal workers were arriving with STIs, like the majority. It was like in our top 3 health issues, and it was an employer study that employers were taking them to clinics, getting them medical treatment, and then going home. And of course, because the situation at home wasn't being fixed, they would return again and that's a sexual health issue. But on the other foot, we're seeing when research that I've been doing in communities where women are saying to me, our husbands are coming home and making us dirty. So there's complaints about, the different types of not just coming home with STIs, but coming home with ideas from porn sites that they're accessing while they're in Australia. Don't get me wrong, I actually focus on the positive stuff normally, but so I was just wondering if you guys were looking at, their impact when they do have some education around that as well, going home as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the bigger picture and what we're trying to prevent, going back home. We don't have the capacity back in the Pacific Islands to say if there was an outbreak of STIs, right? We don't have the sexual health clinics there to meet the demands. So we want to tackle it here while they're here. One of the things that we can't, having challenges with the data is whether or not they are coming here with an STI or whether they contract it here. So that's an aspect that we're looking into. But in terms of the education that we deliver, that's the picture that we look at. Like that's how far we look ahead. And we talk about consent, we talk about porn, and we, what's it called? We dismantle like myths around sexual health. So things that they may have learned through porn websites or just through Google. And so our approach is really creating that culturally safe space. We know that this topic is very sacred, and there's a VAR or space between that we need to acknowledge. And that's why we have the men's session, the women's session, and we're working together with like people like Lindy on the research side to try and build our data, and so that we can, I guess, take a better approach to how we're delivering sessions and running these. And I guess I should also mention that's why we are so heavy with a collaborative approach, working with GPs, hospitals, working with clinicians. We bring everyone together because we know if there is an STI infection, it's not just like a once-off medication, it's over time. So we try and tackle that here before they go back home.
So thank you very much for that first two presentations. We'll move on to our next two presenters. Christina Thyna from Vanuatu is currently a legal consultant with the Vanuatu Intellectual Property Office, particularly the Traditional Knowledge Division. She has, among other things, set up a local NGO, Nambawan Family Association, which prioritizes the well-being of families in Vanuatu. Nambawan Family Association is an advocate of the Child Protection Bill in Vanuatu and the impact of labor mobility on Vanuatu families. Thank you, Christina.
Hello, everyone. Greetings from my people in Vanuatu. It's an honor and privilege for me to participate in this workshop and to be presenting. So I'll talk about the impacts of labor mobility in the nation of Vanuatu. I have worked closely with the Department of Labor back home, and I've met some of the stakeholders, some of the seasonal workers who return home to gather the information that I'll be presenting this afternoon. So my presentation will focus mainly on social welfare of the workers and on the impact on families back home. My presentation will be divided into 5 parts. The first part, I'll be giving out some data from the 2020 census and some of the data I got online. Secondly, I'll be looking at the positive and the negative impacts of labor mobility on families in Vanuatu. Thirdly, I'll discuss some of the policies that are in place now. And fourthly, the initiatives put in place by the government, Tafa, and other stakeholders. And I'll conclude with the recommendations. Since I'm given only 15 minutes, I'll go through some of the slides because I'm taking that some of us do already have knowledge of the labor schemes in place. About Vanuatu, I think most of us know where it is. Labor mobility schemes in place. We have the recognized seasonal employment and the PALM scheme in Australia that replaced the SWP and PLS. The national database, we have the in-country recruitment database that is based with the Labour Department, a visa data collected from the Australian High Commission, New Zealand High Commission, MNE, which is a database with the Immigration Department, and PALM database, which is accessible online. Unfortunately, the national database is not centralized. We do have issues with the in-country recruitment database with the Labour Department because there needs inputs from agents for accuracy. data. And these are information that we probably already know. There's around 60,400 workers spread all over Australia. These are records from June 2024. In New South Wales, we have 810, Victoria 930, Queensland 2,790, South Australia 435, Western Australia 875, Tasmania 200, Northern Territory 180. So these are data I collected from PALM database. And in New Zealand, we can see that on 20th of March 2024, there's been a record of 2,500 workers. I understand that the adjustment needs to be made with the data that we have at the moment because of people who have absconded, workers who have never returned home. So our data still need to be, we still need accurate data on workers that are currently overseas. There's an unequal distribution of workers within the country. Vanuatu is made up of more than 80 islands, 66 of which are inhabitants, and we have 6 provinces. So you will notice that Shefa province, as most of the workers are from this area, because there are islands around the capital of Vanuatu. And you will notice that, for example, Torba province, there's only 4% that are from this area. So there's unequal distribution because of lack of information, inaccessible information from people from the other islands. Reasons contributing to the low participation: lack of accessibility of information, low literacy rate, transportation cost. People have to move from different islands to the center to obtain information. Accommodation is an issue when you move to Port Vila. Interested participants have to live with family members who already have issues with accommodation, so that makes accessibility very low. And the Labour Mobility Office is based in Port Vila, in the capital. Unequal participation is also an issue. We have 80% of our men who are involved in labor scheme work. This is due to the agriculture and viticulture sectors that generally prefer to hire male because of physical intensity of work. 20% of women are left back home to look after the children. But with the horticulture, aged care, hospitality, and tourism industry, we are looking at an increase of women participation in those programs. People with diverse sexual orientation are often discriminated. There's record of 2 disabled people, 2 amputees, who are participating in the PALM scheme, who are also Paralympians, Eli Enoch and Ken Kahun. And this is, I think the Disability Society is tapping on this to open the door to disabled people to have access in the labor mobility scheme. Returning workers have more opportunities of being hired. Only half of the workers participate in more than 1 season. Positive impacts, that's the second part of my presentation. Unemployment issues are addressed. We have total remittances recorded for the period 2014 to 2021, 94 billion Vatu, significant contribution to the country's economy. It's a triple plus, as one of the presenters this morning mentioned. So it's a win-win for the sending country and the receiving country. Farmers are satisfied for a productive season. Workers go home with cash with them, and they are able to invest in new businesses that were not possible before. Negative impacts: we see welfare issues, disengaged workers, exploitation of workers, absconding, blacklisting, brain drain, antisocial behavior, marriage breakdown. Welfare issues: we don't have the facts or the figures with us, so we will rely mainly on the number of complaints that were lodged with the Department of Labor. So we have complaints about extramarital affairs and divorce. Children born in Australia and New Zealand cases of workers who never return home, workers who were prevented by the spouse for traveling for a second trip due to the initial unsuccessful trip, cases of children remaining with extended families. We also have children who are out of school due to lack of school fees, unsupervised children leading to increase in youth crime, and early school leavers. Kids are preferring seasonal work for quick time cash instead of going through the normal education program. And families left behind who need financial assistance. Now, the third part of my presentation, the legal framework, policies that are in place. We have the Seasonal Workers Act, number 23 of 2007, which is currently being reviewed. The 2019 policy, which is soon to be replaced by the current policy, 2023 policy, which has been approved by the Council of Ministers and will soon be launched. So the seasonal workers, the first policy in place, it was introduced in 2007 when the RSC scheme was introduced. It mainly focused, unfortunately, on the requirements for private agents to obtain licenses, work visa requirements, and so the focus was mainly on agents and not so on migrant workers. So at the moment, the act is outdated and is currently being revised. Secondly, we have the 2019 labor mobility policy. The goal is the goals and the mission to be achieved are summarized in 5 pillars. Pillar 1, increase of the number of migrants going abroad, as well as the aim is to encourage the recruitment of more women, more people in the rural areas and the disadvantaged workers. Pillar 2, improve the skills and training to make Vanuatu workers more desirable and productive abroad. Pillar 3, improve recruitment to protect migrants before departure, station liaison officers abroad to assist Vanuatu migrants. Pillar 4, increase the benefits and reduce the cost of temporary labor migration for migrants, their communities in Vanuatu. Pillar 5, use of focal points, data and enforcement to increase the demand for and the protection for Vanuatu workers. And finally, Pillar 6, the objective is to ensure that pension contributions related to work abroad are accessible to migrants after they return home. So that's the second policy in place. The third policy that has been approved by the Council of Ministers and will be launched in September this year is the 2023 Labour Mobility Policy. And the goals are summarized in 5 pillars. The first pillar, refocusing Vanuatu's engagement in labour mobility as a program for sustainable development that reflects our national priorities and pursues strategic data-driven, evidence-based program options. Pillar 2, that the objective of the policy is also to enable Vanuatu workers, their families and communities to set and achieve their development goals, what they travel for, and we want to help Vanuatu's to achieve their goals. Pillar 3, strategically approaching labour mobility supply and management to better connect quality labour supply from Vanuatu with quality work opportunities from employees. Pillar 4, ensuring child-centered family and community social protections are in place, particularly in relation to child welfare and protection, gender and disability inclusions, community safety, disaster management, and adequate support is provided to safeguard family and community structures. Pillar 5, strengthening domestic, bilateral, and regional cooperation to achieve the above goals and improve worker welfare and benefits. So the liaison officers who are in Australia, we have Patrice Kwatonga, Peter Foiliaki, David Chilson, and in New Zealand, we have Olive Fleur Johnson. And their objective is to provide welfare support to the workers. And we also have the Labour Mobility Working Committee that's in place to achieve the goals set out in the 2023 policy. The initiatives put in place by in the country, mainly sponsored by DFAT, Family Ready Program, pre-departure programs, Family Comeback Program, Work Ready Program, Grow in Vanuatu Program, Family Accompanied Pilot Project, and Vanuatu National Reintegration Strategy. Family Ready Program, quickly, it's funded by DFAT and in partnership with the Department of Labor, IOM and World Vision. It's a 5-day training that deals with the welfare of the worker and the immediate family, and consider the labor mobility as a family journey. So family members attend the training, the workshop together with the workers. Family Ready Program, the findings are that communication has been a challenge, there's violence, that's one of the areas of concern, and child welfare is a major concern. Pre-departure programs, the objective is to achieve the welfare of the workers, and it's a 2-day training run by the Department of Labor before labor migrants leave Australia, funded by DFAT and implemented by IOM. Working Ready program, that's in collaboration with the Australian Pacific Training Coalition, APTC, and it's also a DFAT-funded optional 10-day course for upskilling purposes. Grow in Vanuatu, which means let's build or let's grow Vanuatu together. It's also funded by DFAT and New Zealand in partnership with the Department of Labor and VLAB to implement economic reintegration in the country. Family Accompanied Pilot Project, I think there's a DFAT representative who can tell us more. Let me go quickly through the recommendation. We want the government to look at the Seasonal Workers Amendment Act, accessibility of service, that's in line with the decentralization policy, fair participation for all, data have to be accurate and centralized, monitoring of employers, family accompanying pilot project, child protection is the main concern. So we want more research on that. We want to prioritize a mechanism in place that could gather for services for families. Having said that, this brings us to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina. So I'm sure we have lots of questions, so we'll save it after Dinesh's presentation. Our second and final presentation for this session is Dinesh Monash. He is the National Project Officer for the IOM in Canberra, Australia, with over a decade of experience at the UN Migration Agency. His expertise spans the delivery of programs focused on return and reintegration, as well as social integration for new migrants. In 2023, so just last year, Dinesh played a key role in the reintegration assessment conducted in Vanuatu. Please, Dinesh.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you for inviting IOM to this presentation. It's great to be here, and for those who are not aware of IOM's role, Christina mentioned some of the programs that we're doing in Vanuatu. I'll elaborate on some of them as well. We are present in 10 locations in the Pacific, and in Australia, we have an office in Canberra, as well as offices in 5 other states and territories. So that's our footprint here. And our role is mainly in terms of implementation of projects, and also engaging with the governments with regard to the strategies that can be developed around migration. Therefore, goes without saying, we do focus on the SDGs and how we can help our member states to achieve the SDGs. In particular, in the area of return and reintegration, which I'm going to go into a bit more details today in this presentation, we have worked with Fiji to develop the return guidelines, and we are doing Solomon Islands, doing the survey of 1,200 workers. And in Tuvalu, we worked with the government to create the national reintegration strategy. And last year, in 2023, we did a preliminary assessment regarding return and reintegration in Vanuatu. I will go into a few snippets of interesting information and share some of the experiences we learned. As you know, the cycle of migration it comprises of 3 sections. There's pre-departure, what happens during overseas when they work, and also return and reintegration. This is a simplistic way of presenting the focus that needs to be there at different stages. But most importantly, although these 3 are distinct stages, we want to emphasize that any kind of programming that we do need to bear in mind the implications on other areas as well. And when we're talking about the journey of a migrant, the worker, farm worker, but when they're ready to get on that flight, and when they say goodbye to their families to arrive in either New Zealand or Australia, they fly not only with their hopes and dreams, they are flying with the hopes and dreams of their families. The variables at play here are quite interesting. They're leaving behind, the decision to migrating also includes the decision to leave behind your spouse, your kids who are growing up, the elderly parents, the businesses you may have created. So there are a lot of factors at play. And these variables continue on in their journey till they come back to their country. And the weightage of each of these variables may change somewhat, but nevertheless, these are factors that needs to be considered. And why I'm bringing this to your attention is only because it's so important to consider the family approach when we are arranging the policies and also implementing at both implementation as well as policy level. And and the government of Vanuatu, the Department of Labour, quite rightly pointed out, I think, Christina, you mentioned this as well, migration is a family journey. It is definitely a family journey, although it's one person traveling, there's a lot more to it. I'll take you through some of the findings. Due to time constraints, I'm going to limit my findings on Vanuatu to just 2 separate sections, but there's a lot to learn in this, a lot to unpack. I'll start with remittances first. So as you may know, back during COVID period in 2021, a lot of migrants remitted considerable amount of money simply because they could not travel back to their country, and also because there was a high need for the families. In Vanuatu, in 2021, the remittance percentage of remittance as a percentage of GDP was around 21%. It's quite significant. It did come down the next year, and I'm going to go into a bit of details shortly on that as well. But it's around 15% now, so it is still quite significant. In our assessment, we wanted to identify what are they using the remittances for. And we asked the question, what are you using the remittance in the short time frame, and also includes the savings. I'll come back to the point I mentioned earlier. In 2022, a lot of people, rather than sending money, they collected the money, bought stuff because they knew they could, the borders were open and they were able to go back to their home countries, and they took it in the form of presents or, in that form. So as a result, although this number tends to vary, our question was more around what are you using those savings or remittances for? And predominantly, it was used for everyday expenses, children's education, and building a strong home. This is in line with some of the other research that has been done in other countries, and it is something which we expected. But here's the next section, which is about the long-term impact. Now, in the long run, quite a lot of them said that they want to start a business. More than 50% of them said they want to start a business. And here's the problem. Working in a farm, for example, and I'll take the example of agriculture, working in a farm will give you the technical skills. But what's required to start a business is actually the entrepreneurship skills, and the budgeting knowledge, and so forth. So there's a gap which needs to be bridged, which is a great segue to the next one on skills transfer. So here are some interesting stats that we wanted to share. And again, this is from this preliminary assessment. It is a snapshot, and it may not be used in a sort of a trend analysis or anything, but still it's worth to discuss this and try to understand the limitations that we have identified. 87% of the workers said that they learned a new skill during their presence in working overseas. That's a very positive thing. 64% have got it through a formal method. In other words, it could be orientation or a job training or something along those lines, which is also quite a positive thing. But here's the punchline. 34% of them say that they cannot use their skills, only 34% are saying they can use the skills that they acquired overseas upon return. And why? Why is that? So here we go into the qualitative data to learn about the stories. One of them said that it's because the particular fruits that they're growing that they worked on is not grown back in the country. Or if they have worked in heavy machinery, they don't have the scale back in their country to implement it because they don't have the scalability as such to use those equipment. So that's another concern. So we wanted to just throw out some of these interesting snippets of information that we discovered in this preliminary assessment. All right. And there's one more thing to add to this, the family part of it. If the skill transfer is low as what it says, it gets even worse when you try to add the family into the equation, because sometimes the family members will also need to gain those experiences, all those skills, because if they remigrate, the family will have to take care of the business. So these are some of the interesting factors to consider. It's a lot being done, a lot of discussion on this already. So there's a possibility for us to move forward, indeed, which takes us to what IOM is doing in Vanuatu specifically. As Christina mentioned, we do the Family Ready program. It's a 5-day workshop. It has benefited 3,000 individuals. As the name suggests, it is prior to leaving the country, where they get knowledge, and also the family can participate and get the knowledge around what will happen upon arrival in overseas countries. Family Come Back is a new program we are commencing, where when they arrive back in the country, how they can reintegrate. I want to throw an interesting question here. How do you measure sustainability of reintegration? This is a question that has grappled many governments. IOM has been delivering reintegration programs for almost 50 years now in the world. And from Australia, we've done it for more than 10 years, I think about 13 years now. So in this, we have now built a mechanism to look at the economic, social, and psychosocial aspects and do a survey to identify a weighted average system in order to identify which segment is doing well and which is not. I wouldn't necessarily say that you can blindly implement it across the board. There are certain limitations, of course, in terms of when do we actually measure it, and how often do you have to measure it. These are factors which you can consider, but just wanted to highlight that there is a vast amount of information and knowledge we can gain by looking at other countries and how they implement different programs that may relate to this. And let me bring it together by sharing some areas for consideration. Improving the quality of data. We had a few speakers discussing about it, and it's always a challenging area, not only because it's difficult to gain the data, but it's also because the changing nature, the dynamics around it. So that's one aspect of it. And then strengthen the services and environment in countries of origin and destination, improving the training and skills development, which we mentioned earlier. And the crux of this whole presentation is to recognize and harness the circular nature of labor mobility or the continuum. And these are the factors we need to consider. I want to finish by leaving a thought on further thought with you. In these kind of forums, we strive to get solutions. We try to get the best solution and debate on and discuss on that. Sometimes we need to take a step back and ask ourselves, what are the right questions to ask in order to get the appropriate solutions? So I think this is the playing field where the academia, the policy makers, and practitioners like IOM and international organizations all can come together in order to find those solutions that will benefit the migrants and enhance these programs benefiting all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dinesh and Christina. I think, trying to cushion the negative impacts of family separation, child protection, as well as leveraging the benefits of migration at the same time, are very crucial and important to ensuring that we can achieve positive outcomes for the scheme for all stakeholders. So I'm opening it up now to the floor to ask questions to our I think it's very, very interesting presentation. So thank you much.
My colleague, he wants me to share my research, but no. So anyway, Dinesh, I just have a couple of questions, especially around the business skills. So you're probably aware of the Munasinha program, which delivers business skills, and a lot of my research participants have gone through that, built great businesses. The problem that I didn't see up there was the business environment that we're expecting them to try to build these businesses. And I was wondering if you want to talk a bit more about that.
Thank you for that question. Actually, the 64% includes a substantial number of them who have gone through that program. So yes, you're right. There's also an interesting program that is done by WeLab where they are engaging for entrepreneurial purposes. What's happening right now is they are getting the subscriptions that's required, but when it comes to the following through the program and then implementing it is where we are losing some of that, some of the participants really. One more thing to add, both my colleagues, Nina and Ashmita, who are in Vanuatu right now, engaging with the government of Vanuatu and working on the reintegration strategy. These are some of the things that we are looking at and trying to see how we can use these skills. It might be a bit of a trial and error as we go through it, but you're absolutely right. That is a great initiative in New Zealand, and also hopefully there will be ways to make it work in those countries when they return as well. It might also be just a time factor as well. When a program is new, it takes time for people to be aware of it, and these programs generally don't spread just because you use media. It spreads because you have people saying, oh, this program worked, this was really good. So the word of mouth is so valuable in this space. So I'm very much hopeful that it'll happen. Yeah, yeah.
So the cultural context of businesses has a real impact on business.
Yes, that's correct. There's, I think in one of the interviews, I think that might be about the business environment as well. So it was a question some of the participants were saying in this, where if they could also start a business and have some level of stability around whether they're actually going to stay in the country or not, that plays another crucial role, because they might start the business and somewhere down the track they'll be like, oh, maybe I've run out of money, or I want to scale it up significantly, therefore I want to go back. So there's a remigration cycle which works into it. But we'd love to discuss more about it. It's a very good point.
I could just probably expect that females that start businesses with their partner's money, their business usually, sorry. The females that start businesses with the money from usually their husbands usually last longer because they are there after those businesses. So that's what we found.
One last question. Judy.
Hi, I had a question also for Dinesh, and it's the notion of reintegration. Just wonder what you mean by that, or how that's kind of operationalized. I've done a lot of work over the years researching and working with prisoners, and it's called reintegration of prisoners when they're released back into the community. But as we know, people change when they're in prison, and the community in which they return to changes. So what are we really, how are we conceiving of reintegration, I guess is the question.
Sure, thanks for the question. There's a lot to unpack there, but I'll keep it short. So we are looking at, when it comes to reintegration, we're looking at three separate aspects: the economic integration, the social and the psychosocial. And ideal scenario for measuring it is in 2017, IOM did a study on this. We came up with a set of surveys where we looked at a period of 1.5 years to consider. And with regard to social integration, this area is on that. We asked questions around housing, whether they have access to housing, how they are integrating with their other community members, access to schools. And these are factors even in Vanuatu, for example, it depends, it changes significantly from place where you are. In Port Vila is where you get most number of doctors, around 90% plus of the doctors in Vanuatu are based there. So the experience of someone who's in Port Vila may be very different to someone who's somewhere else. So when you operationalize it, you're right, it does become quite a difficult process, but in this survey, we try to capture it as much as possible. And just to add one more thing to it, in this survey, there are also there are a couple of questions that lead into remigration. And the question as to whether remigration happens as of a choice or whether you're pushed into remigration because of the conditions are not good enough for you to continue in the country. So I hope I kind of answered it. It's a quite a deep topic to explore. Thank you.
Thank you for applauding before I actually. But once again, on behalf of the organizers, thank you, Lindy, Sara, Christina, and Dinesh for your contributions and your participation. And on that note, I will close this session and we can all go for afternoon tea.